Sabora Gagani was born on September 14, 1991, in Tirana, Albania. At some point, Sabora's parents separated, and shortly afterward, her mother, Elisabetta, decided to move away with her children, relocating to Rome, Italy. There, Elisabetta worked tirelessly to raise her children on her own. Sabora was known for her cheerful disposition and quickly became popular among her school friends, who affectionately called her Sibi. She was a strikingly beautiful young woman with dark skin, tall and slender, with long, flowing hair and an energetic personality. Sabora enjoyed spending time with friends, attending parties and listening to music at high volumes. According to her mother, she had a deep love for children and dreamed of becoming a teacher. However, she was also drawn to the world of modeling and took her first step in that direction by competing and winning a regional beauty contest. Despite her modeling aspirations, Sabora's family needed financial support, so she began working as a waitress in a local restaurant, where she quickly earned everyone's affection. Fate took a turn when Sabora was 18 years old and met Marco, a 31-year-old tall, handsome, and charming man. Although little is known about him, it was confirmed that he had at least one sister and had been previously married. By the time he met Sabora, he was divorced. Sabora fell deeply in love with Marco, and their feelings were mutual. Unbeknownst to Sabora, Marco had a troubled past. According to those close to him, Marco had a reputation with the local police due to his violent tendencies and issues with drug use. About a year into their relationship, Sabora and Marco informed her family that they had decided to move to Spain, as Marco claimed that there were not enough job opportunities for him in Italy. They planned to settle in Torremolinos, a Spanish municipality in the province of Malaga. Elisabetta was not thrilled about her young daughter moving to another country with a man significantly older than her, but Sabora was an adult, and despite her mother's concerns, the couple went ahead with their plan. Upon arriving in Torremolinos in 2011, Sabora and Marco settled in the beach area of La Carihuela. Initially, the couple appeared happy, and Sabora maintained close contact with her mother, communicating daily by phone or social media. She quickly found work as a waitress in a local restaurant, and Marco secured a job as a cook and pizza maker. However, it soon became evident that the problem was not a lack of opportunities in Italy, but Marco's inability to keep a job, as he couldn't hold down a position in Spain either. As time passed, Marco's true nature began to surface, and jealousy-fueled arguments with Sabora became increasingly frequent. Elisabetta witnessed this firsthand when she visited the couple to see how they were living. During her visit, she noticed that the relationship was deteriorating with bitter and frequent arguments, even in her presence. Over the following months, Sabora returned to Italy several times, with some reports suggesting that she only stayed in Spain during the holiday seasons. It's possible that her return was also influenced by the fact that her residence permit had expired, and she had been using a false Italian identity to travel. By late 2013, nearing the third anniversary of their relationship, Sabora returned to her mother's home and confided that she had left Marco for good. She was tired of trying to make things work and had decided not to return, realizing that the situation was not improving. But soon after, Marco showed up at the family's home, as often happens, swearing that everything would change. He even proposed marriage, and unfortunately, Sabora was swayed by his promises. Things did improve for a while, but eventually, jealousy and violence returned to dominate their relationship. Elisabetta later recalled that her daughter began to feel increasingly frightened. On one occasion, Sabora confided to her mother that if she wanted to leave Marco, she would have to disappear, as he wouldn't let her go otherwise. By June 2014, it seemed clear that any hope for reconciliation between Sabora and Marco had faded. Sabora left the house they shared and moved into an apartment. Once settled, she called her mother, telling her that she had ended things with Marco for good and that she finally felt as free as a butterfly. However, things started to become strange when, in early July, Marco called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. Surprised, Elisabetta asked what had happened, and Marco told her that 2 days earlier they had a heated argument, after which Sabora left the house, leaving all her belongings behind. Elisabetta didn't believe his story because Sabora had informed her a month earlier about her move, making it clear that Marco was lying by claiming she had just left 2 days prior. Adding to the worry, during all that time, Elisabetta had received no news from her daughter. Deep down, she hoped that Sabora was following through with what she had said, leaving Marco and disappearing. But the situation took a chilling turn when, in a subsequent conversation, Marco told Elisabetta a different version of events. He claimed that a security guard at the residence had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases, saying she had left without disclosing her destination. This contradicted his earlier statement that she had left without taking anything. The family waited anxiously for Sabora to make contact. They were certain that, even if she wanted to disappear from Marco's life without revealing her whereabouts, she would never completely cut off contact with her siblings, especially her mother. The last time anyone heard from her was on July 7, 2014, when she exchanged a WhatsApp message with Marco. After that, her phone was disconnected and there was no activity on her social media accounts. The following week, Marco traveled to Italy and visited Sabora's family. He shared a coffee with Elisabetta, lamenting the disappearance of his beloved, and spoke with Sabora's brother, expressing disbelief that she had left without explanation, while insisting he had no idea what could have happened to her. During this time, Marco told Elisabetta that he had printed missing person posters and had been placing them around the area. He also claimed that Sabora had been seen boarding a bus, then suggested she might have traveled to Argentina. Additionally, he mentioned hearing that she had been spotted with a dark-skinned man with whom she seemed to be arguing. However, Marco never did the most logical thing, reporting Sabora's disappearance to the authorities. That responsibility fell to Elisabetta, who not only reported her daughter missing, but also suggested that Marco might be involved. The police began an investigation, interviewing Marco as the last person to see her, but he repeated his story. The authorities confirmed that the couple had separated, though it seemed they were still in contact, as some of Sabora's personal belongings were found in the residence. This unsettling situation persisted for the following months. In 2015, in an effort to expand the search for Sabora nationwide, the authorities sought the help of the association dedicated to disseminating information and images of people who have gone missing under unexplained circumstances. Unfortunately, this effort also yielded no results. Sabora's family, however, refused to give up and ensured that Italian media also circulated information about the missing young woman. Life continued for everyone, though in very different ways. While Sabora's family lived with the anguish of not knowing her whereabouts, clinging to the increasingly faint hope that she would return, Marco's life moved on, albeit with the same bad habits. During this time, Marco changed his appearance, shaving his head, growing a beard, and entering into 2 relationships, both of which ended with the women filing complaints against him. Marco remained in Spain, where, to those around him, he appeared to be a normal man, always greeting his neighbors with a smile, a regular at the gym, a fan of target shooting, and a lover of sports like baseball and martial arts. By 2023, 9 years had passed since Sabora's disappearance, and Marco had a new partner, a woman named Paula. What was known about Paula's life was that before Marco, she had been in a stable relationship from which she had a daughter and a son. After the breakup, and once she began living with Marco, they had a child together. One thing that hadn't changed in Marco's life was his instability at work, and over the years, he had gone through several jobs. While working at a pizzeria, he became friends with a man named Victor Molina. One day, Marco approached Victor, asking for work, stating that he had been unemployed for a while and that his family was struggling. Victor, willing to help, gave both Marco and Paula jobs at his restaurant, where Victor's sister Victoria had been working until then. Later, Victor even rented an apartment to the couple. Paula proved to be an excellent worker, earning the trust and affection of her employers. However, the same couldn't be said for Marco, with whom Victor had several problems. The last straw came when Victoria arrived at the restaurant one day to find the employee bathroom door completely destroyed. Paula, deeply embarrassed, admitted that Marco had broken the door, accusing her of hiding there to have intimate relations with co-workers. This incident led Victor to transfer Marco to work under his direct supervision at another place. During her time at the restaurant, Paula had earned not only trust as an employee, but also personal affection. Victoria, in particular, knew that the relationship between Marco and Paula was not just troubled, but virtually non-existent. Paula confided that Marco had physically assaulted her. Her employers urged her to report him to the authorities, knowing that with his record, he would likely end up in jail. However, Paula downplayed the incident, claiming it was just 4 punches and a kick. To her employers, this explanation was shocking, but there was an underlying reason why Paula continued living with Marco. She revealed that social services had taken her children away after finding drugs in their home that belonged to Marco. Paula confessed that she wanted to leave Marco, with whom she said she no longer had a romantic relationship, but she lacked the means to do so and needed to maintain the appearance of a stable relationship to regain custody of her children. Since securing a steady job, Paula was closer to achieving that goal. She hoped to save enough money to rent her own place and separate from Marco. She also shared that she had been undergoing weekly drug tests at a clinic for months to prove she was drug-free, and she held out hope that by October of that year, she would be reunited with her children. While Marco was working at the new establishment, his performance did not improve, and he lasted only a month and a half. Victor, the owner, discovered that a kitchen knife had gone missing, and he reported the theft to the authorities. Shortly after filing the report, Victor decided to fire Marco. Just a few days after Marco's dismissal, on Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula was in high spirits. It was her day off, and she had plans for the evening. The next day, Wednesday, May 17, 2014, Victoria was looking forward to hearing about Paula's night when she came in for her shift. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Paula was getting ready for work. It was around 11:30 in the morning when loud screams were heard from the apartment shared by Marco and Paula. While it wasn't unusual for the couple to argue, there was something different about Paula's cries this time. Her voice sounded desperate and she was pleading for help. Victor and another employee immediately rushed upstairs and began pounding on the door, asking what was happening and pleading with Paula to tell them if she was okay. One of the men claimed to have heard faint whimpers in the background. Seconds later, Marco's voice emerged, assuring them that everything was fine and that Paula had just gone back to bed. Paula's voice was no longer heard. The door remained closed, and something in Marco's tone set off alarm bells for the concerned men. Victor ran to fetch a spare key to the apartment from his house, while the other employee went to grab his phone to call the police. Hearing the men leave the door, Marco calmly exited the apartment and left the building. Minutes later, police officers and medical personnel arrived at the scene. They knocked on the door again, but there was no response. Victor unlocked the door for them, and what they found inside was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Lying on the floor was Paula's lifeless body, her clothes stained red with numerous stab wounds. The paramedics could do nothing but pronounce her dead at the scene, and it was clear that the suspected assailant was no longer present. Within minutes, the area was swarming with law enforcement, investigators, and medical personnel. Authorities immediately launched a manhunt for the suspect based on witness statements. The efforts paid off. A local resident identified Marco from the photo at a nearby establishment. Less than 6 hours after the incident, at 5:30 that same evening, Marco was apprehended while calmly drinking a beer. He offered no resistance, and the arrest attracted the attention of everyone present in the establishment and in the surrounding area. Marco was taken to the police station for questioning, while initial reports indicated that Paula had sustained 14 stab wounds to her body. In the days that followed, new details emerged, revealing the extent of Marco's manipulations. It was discovered that on the night Paula went out, Marco had been searching for her, even asking local taxi drivers for information on who had driven her and where she had gone. This was just the tip of the iceberg, as the surprises were far from over. Upon learning of Marco's arrest for the murder of his then-girlfriend, the pain of Cibora's mother, Elisabetta, resurfaced. She once again voiced the plea that had been her cry for many years. Incredibly, Elisabetta's plea was answered almost immediately. As Marco was being escorted through the police station, he stopped in front of a bulletin board displaying images from ongoing investigations. Among them was the missing person poster for Cibora Gagani, whose case had remained open for 9 years. According to the officers, upon seeing the poster, Marco paused and dropped a bombshell. He claimed he wanted to cooperate because the memory of what he had done would haunt him forever. He confessed that he and Cibora had argued, and he had killed her and buried her in an apartment. And not only that, when the officers were still reeling from the shock, Marco offered to show them where he had hidden her body in the apartment they had lived in together. The authorities, cautious of his intentions, did not accept his offer immediately. Returning to the case at hand on Saturday, May 20th, Marco, 45, was formally presented in court. He exercised his right to remain silent and only responded to questions from his defense attorney, who requested a psychiatric and toxicological evaluation for her client in connection with Paula's murder. During this hearing, Marco said nothing about his earlier revelation regarding Cibora's case. The court ordered that Marco be held in provisional custody without bail while being investigated for the crime of murder within the context of gender violence, and that he undergo a drug addiction protocol the same day. It was also noted that the court had reopened the investigation into the disappearance of Cibora Gagani, which had occurred 9 years earlier. From that moment on, investigators set out to determine the truth of Marco's statements made at the police station. Over the next few days, a massive operation was launched. On Monday, May 22nd, officers visited the apartment where Marco and Cibora had once lived. At that time, the apartment was occupied by another couple who were fully cooperative with the authorities. In the following days, specialized teams meticulously searched every inch of the apartment located near the town hall and police station where Cibora's body was allegedly hidden. The search of the apartment began with a visual inspection, looking for any irregularities in the walls or floors, but nothing out of the ordinary was discovered. Subsequent inspections involved the use of densitometers and micro cameras. Small holes were drilled throughout various parts of the apartment to insert cameras, and examined the interiors of the walls and floors. However, these efforts did not yield any positive results. According to the press, Marco continued to talk from prison, where he supposedly claimed that he had used acid to dispose of Saboura's remains. Meanwhile, investigators refused to give up, even after 3 fruitless searches of the apartment. During the 4th attempt, officers analyzed the building's floor plans and noticed that 2 identical apartments were located on the same floor. When they visited the twin apartment, they realized that there was a large space in the bedroom that did not match the layout of the apartment under investigation. With this clue, the specialists focused on a particular wall that appeared unaltered and was identical to the rest of the building, but in reality concealed a hollow space behind it. With the necessary authorization, on June 6th, the officers broke through the wall. Behind it, they found a large wooden crate filled with lime. As they began removing the lime, the first grim discoveries emerged. The first thing they found was a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood. Next, they uncovered some objects that apparently belonged to the victim, followed by a bouquet of flowers placed on top of several plastic bags. Inside the bags, they found a camping sleeping bag, and within it, the remains of a woman. Following the gruesome discovery, the body was transported for an autopsy to confirm the cause of death and to establish whether the remains were indeed those of Saboura. Meanwhile, in Italy, Saboura's family was on edge after a friend informed them of Marco's arrest for Paula's murder and the search for Saboura's body. Elisabetta said that the news of her daughter's death at Marco's hands hit her like a bucket of cold water. She revealed that the only joy she had experienced during those years of uncertainty was becoming a grandmother, thanks to her son. She also shared that Saboura's father had passed away due to illness, without ever knowing what had happened to his daughter. Shortly after, Spanish authorities contacted Elisabetta to request a DNA sample to conclusively confirm that the body entombed in the wall was her daughter's. However, there was little doubt, as the remains bore some tattoos that had been reported as distinguishing features when the disappearance was initially filed. A Spanish team traveled to Elisabetta's home to collect a saliva sample, and the DNA comparison left no room for doubt. The body was indeed that of Saboura Gagani, who had gone missing at 22 and would have been 31 at the time of discovery. After the autopsy, it was revealed that despite the condition of the remains, the cause of death had been multiple stab wounds. More than 5 months after Saboura's remains were found in the wall of the apartment she had shared with the man who would become her executioner, her family announced that she would be coming home. Finally, Saboura's family and friends were able to bid her a final farewell in a funeral service. At the end of the service, friends of the young woman released balloons into the sky with messages written for someone who had once been a cheerful, good friend who only dreamed of becoming a model and finding happiness. After enduring the hardest moment a family can face, all efforts were now focused on ensuring that justice was served and that the person responsible for Saboura's untimely death would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. On Tuesday, January 30th, 2024, Marco was testifying before the court in a hearing requested by his defense attorney. However, instead of speaking, he handed over a 17-page handwritten letter in which he admitted responsibility for Paula's death, but with notable caveats. In the letter, Marco claimed that he and Paula had a tumultuous relationship fueled by large amounts of alcohol and cocaine, which they both consumed. He confessed to taking Paula's life but alleged that she had been agitated because he owed her 50 euros and she had discovered his infidelity. Marco claimed that his only fault was defending himself too forcefully, though he did not explain how the woman's wounds ended up on her back if the attack was in self-defense. Despite his partial confession, Marco remained silent about Saboura's case, stating only that he had wrapped her body in bags, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, filled the box with lime, and built a false wall to conceal everything. However, he denied being responsible for her death, though he admitted that what he had done was disgusting. Amidst all his lies, Marco claimed that since his arrest, he had experienced a profound spiritual awakening and was now deeply remorseful. Marco claimed that members of the Albanian mafia were responsible for the death of Saboura. According to his twisted story, these dangerous men had loaned him 25,000 euros to start a business, specifically a brothel. However, Marco claimed that some Colombians had stolen the money after a night of partying, leaving him without the funds to start the business and unable to repay the loan. One day, the Albanian mobsters showed up at his home to collect the debt. There were 4 armed men. One pointed a gun at Marco while the other 3 confronted Saboura. Marco claimed that during the heated exchange, one of the mobsters attacked and killed Saboura. He added that the mobsters took 9,000 euros he had stashed in the house from his small-scale drug deals and told him that the rest of the debt would be forgiven if he disposed of Saboura's body. Given the circumstances, Marco agreed to their terms. He claimed he spent 2 days with Saboura's body in the apartment, unsure of what to do, before deciding to wall it up. As of the time of this writing, Marco's fate remains uncertain. The latest information we found was dated May 16, 2024, indicating that the court had decided to proceed with a jury trial for the case of Paula's death on charges of murder and domestic abuse. However, no estimated date has been found for the judicial process concerning Saboura Gagani's case. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. In the mid-1990s in Spain, 2 young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges, from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. So far, No resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together. Adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the 4 other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, there was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as paios. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features, dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a paio. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small 2-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a 3rd child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy, however, was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 km/h on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, the life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old, Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Pryka for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Pryka Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway, located not far from their settlement, was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Pryka, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe, where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Xavier Anzurtegui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000 following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man, asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece, Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings. Home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs, the settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement for Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's M45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation. That is the end of today's story. Thank you for your continued support. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, and sharing. Your support enables me to keep creating. See you soon in another unreal true crime. It was just past 1 in the morning on May 14, 1983, in Orange County, California. Officer Sterling and Sergeant Jaguar were on duty on the San Diego freeway when they spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving really weirdly. They went to pull the car over, and that's when they met him face to face. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the most wanted killer of the last 10 years. The man stood there, spilling beer on the ground and with his pants undone. He agreed to take a breathalyzer test, which he obviously failed. As they were about to arrest him for drunk driving, they felt something wasn't right, like they were missing something big. Sergeant Jaguar checked the car and found something that would haunt him forever. A young guy in the passenger seat, lifeless. This was the scene that the killer hadn't recorded in his secret list, which had more than 67 victims on it, victims who had faced unimaginable horrors. Randy Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was the fourth kid and only the son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and 3 daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In 1948, the Krafts moved to Westminster, Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. After finishing high school in 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College in the small town of Claremont. Randy was into a lot of things there. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and got really into politics. In 1964, he even supported the Vietnam War publicly and helped campaign for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate. Randy also worked at a local gay bar and was so busy that he started taking Valium to help with his stomach and headaches. However, over time, his friends got worried about how much medicine he was using. His grades started to drop, he began drinking, played poker all night, and even failed his econometrics class, which delayed his graduation by 8 months. 1968 was a big year for Randy. He got his economics degree and shifted his political views from right-wing to more democratic, even working hard for Robert Kennedy. That same year, he joined the U.S. Air Force, aced the tests, and showed he was really smart with an IQ of 129. He got sent to Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California, a place with high security. But in 1969, Randy's life changed dramatically when he told his family and friends he was gay. They accepted him, but the military didn't, and he was forced to leave. Feeling down, Randy went back to bartending and later became a truck driver in Huntington Beach. He also started teaching courses at California State University, Long Beach. There, he met Jeff Graves, a younger guy from Minnesota. They started dating, and it looked like Randy was getting his life back on track. But he had a dark secret. In March 1970, while wandering around Huntington Beach, Randy met 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, who had run away from home. Randy invited him to live together, which seemed nice, but he had evil intentions. After bringing Joseph to his apartment, Randy drugged and attacked him. Joseph managed to escape while Randy was at work, and a passerby saw Joseph's bad state and called for help. Joseph was taken to the hospital, where he told the police about being drugged and beaten by Randy, but he didn't mention the abuse. The police went to Randy's apartment without a warrant, and fearing for their jobs, they decided not to press charges, leaving Randy free to offend again. By the end of 1971, the police found an unidentified, decomposed body on Ortega Highway. The victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender. The autopsy indicated he died from alcohol poisoning on September 20th of that year. The investigation stalled, with no leads on Wayne's clothes, belongings, or his killer. On December 26, 1972, police on Highway 405 in Seal Beach found 20-year-old sailor Edward Daniel Moore's body. He was tied at the wrists and ankles, had a hit mark on his face, probably from a blunt instrument, bite marks, and shockingly, a sock stuffed in his rectum. It looked like he'd been thrown from a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, on February 6th, police found a man's body, aged between 17 and 25, near the Terminal Island Freeway. He couldn't be identified, but like Edward Moore, he had a sock stuffed similarly. Police suspected the same killer was behind these crimes, but the culprit remained at large as more victims appeared. On April 9th, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. He had been castrated and sodomized. 13 days later, Another dismembered body was found and given the name John Doe. On July 30th, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Wiebe was found strangled, with marks suggesting he'd been restrained and hung before death. The year ended with another gruesome discovery on December 29th. 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas was found dead in the San Bernardino Mountains. He was openly bisexual. As with several previous victims, one of the victim's socks had been forced into his rectum. Mestas's hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the third victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John Liras. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Laras's body into the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Jonadis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Jonadis had been strangled to death with a length of string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On March 29, 1975, Keith Crotwell and his friend Kent May left home to hitchhike south, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Kraft lured the 2 men from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. The police started searching right away, and soon they got a tip from 2 young people. They said they saw Crotwell and May in a black and white Mustang speeding into a parking lot. The driver quickly leaned over, opened the passenger door, and pushed May out onto the ground. He was almost out of it, probably from drinking or drugs. They saw Crotwell slumped over the driver's shoulder before the car sped off into the night. A month later, they found Crotwell's head at a pier near Long Beach Harbor. The police scoured the city for clues to find the driver. They eventually got a name: Randy Kraft. On May 19th, he was questioned. He admitted picking up Crotwell but claimed he left him at a cafe and knew nothing more. He also said his car later crashed and he had to call a tow truck. Jeff, still his partner, backed up his story. The detectives didn't believe him, but the Los Angeles County prosecutors wouldn't charge him due to the lack of evidence and because they couldn't find the rest of Crotwell's body or determine how he died. So, Jeff was free again. After a cool-down period, his crime spree just got worse. On December 31st, he kidnapped 22-year-old Mark Hall, tied him to a tree in a canyon, abused him, cut off his private parts, stuffed them into his rectum, burned him with a lighter on the chest, nose, and cheeks, gouged out his eyes, and then attacked him with a broken bottle. As if that wasn't horrific enough, Kraft suffocated Mark by stuffing leaves and dirt into his throat. When the police found Mark's body, they were shocked, and the autopsy revealed he was alive for much of this ordeal. This led the police to profile the killer as highly intelligent, methodical, and organized, possibly with military background, noting the use of surgical tape on several victims' noses, a technique used in the military to prevent body decomposition after death. On January 24, 1976, investigators from different parts of Southern California gathered in Orange County to discuss how to proceed with the search. Meanwhile, Kraft was living a peaceful life. In the following months, he ended things with Jeff Graves and soon found new love in Jeff Seelig, a 19-year-old baker's apprentice. They moved to Laguna Hills, promised each other forever, and shared a passion for threesomes, often picking up people from highways for this. During this time, Kraft wasn't violent, and it seemed his relationship had quenched his thirst for blood. He went nearly a year without committing any crimes until he struck again on December 10th, killing 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs. Though Fuchs's body was never found, his name was on Kraft's list of victims. Kraft lay low after that, but on April 16, 1978, he strangled Scott Michael Hughes after drugging him with Valium and removed one of his testicles. Hughes's body was found fully clothed except for his shoelaces. On June 11th, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young was found near a San Diego highway, mutilated and stabbed, then thrown from a speeding vehicle. 8 days later, the body of Marine Richard Allen Keith was found in Moulton Parkway, showing signs of being tied up, with strangulation as the cause of death and alcohol in his system. Despite ongoing efforts, police couldn't pin down the killer or save the victims, including Keith Arthur Klingbeil, a 23-year-old found beside Interstate 5, strangled with his shoelaces. At the hospital, they discovered he had ingested large amounts of paracetamol and alcohol and had burn marks on his chest. He died shortly after. On September 29th, Richard Anthony Crosby, 20, was found dead under similar circumstances along Highway 71 in San Bernardino, having vanished the day before while hitchhiking. The California Strangler, as the media dubbed him, had the region in fear, with every officer on alert for the next crime. On November 12, 1978, trucker Michael Joseph Inderbeaton's body was found near the San Diego freeway, castrated like the others. In addition to having been castrated, Inderbeaton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft's attacks became less frequent, with the next one occurring in July 1979 on a highway. Donnie Harold Crissell, a 20-year-old sailor, died from acute alcohol poisoning, with signs of being tied and tortured. 2 months later, parts of 21-year-old British tourist Keith Anthony Jackson were found in trash bags behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were ever found. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated, and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On February 18, 1980, 19-year-old Mark Allen Marsh's body was dumped near Templin Highway, last seen hitchhiking to Buena Park. That summer, Kraft's job took him to Oregon, where he stayed in Portland and claimed 2 more victims. Michael Sean O'Fallon, a recent college graduate hitchhiking across the country, fell prey to Kraft, who drugged and strangled him, his body found near Salem. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. Kraft forced him to swallow a toxic level of Valium and paracetamol before strangling him with a cord. In September, Kraft returned to California and resumed his crimes. this time involving Robert Loggins, with whom he took incriminating photos. These photographs, which were subsequently found in Kraft's possession, show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated, and in various nude, pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, he kidnapped Michael Cluck while hitchhiking, brutally killing him with 31 blows to the head after assaulting him, and dumped his body near Interstate 5 in Oregon. 4 months later, the partially clothed body of male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was discovered in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested several drugs, and a paper towel stuffed in his nostrils caused him to choke on his own mucus. By early 1982, the relationship between Kraft and Selig had become marred by frequent fights and episodes of temporary separation. In an effort to resolve their personal differences, the couple began attending weekly counseling sessions in Huntington Beach. These sessions began on June 22, 1982. Then, the brutality of the killings escalated. Raymond Davis, just 14, disappeared while looking for his dog in Echo Park. 12 days later, he was found decomposed under leaves, wrists tied and shoelace around his neck. Nearby, 16-year-old Robert Avila was found dead under similar circumstances. He had been strangled to death with a length of stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 24-year-old Modesto man named Arne Michael Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 freeway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, 29-year-old Anthony Jose Silveira vanished while hitchhiking. 2 weeks later, his body was found, showing the same signs as previous victims. After this murder, Randy left on business, returning with Silveira's military jacket, ready for more victims. Before returning, he stopped in Michigan, staying at the Grand Rapids Hotel where he met Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn. He drugged and assaulted them, then murdered Dennis by suffocation and Christopher by strangling him with a belt after inserting a pen into Christopher's urethra. Their bodies were found on December 9, 1982, in a field near the hotel. Kraft left Schoenborn's keys and Silveira's jacket in his room before fleeing. That month in Portland, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs by overdosing him with drugs and suffocating him with a sock in his windpipe. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. Eric Church, 21, last seen hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento, was found dead along Interstate 605, suffering similar tortures to Dennis and Christopher, but with signs of struggling against his restraints. He died from strangulation and severe head injuries. On February 12, 1983, Kraft killed 2 Buena Park men, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson and 20-year-old Roger Duvall. The 2 young men were last seen outside the house of a friend named Bryce Wilson shortly after midnight when they told Wilson they intended to purchase something to eat. Kraft continued these heinous acts, unaware that his luck was about to change dramatically. It was 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, when Officer Sterling and Sergeant Howard spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving erratically on the San Diego freeway in Orange County. They pulled it over and outstepped Randy Kraft, casually tossing a beer bottle onto the pavement. Officer Sterling noticed Kraft's pants were undone, which was really odd. He had Kraft do some sobriety tests, which he clearly failed, so they arrested him for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howard approached the Celica and observed a young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man. Receiving no response, Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Searching the car, Howard also found lots of damning evidence: alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescriptions, and an envelope with over 47 eerie photos showing young men in explicit, lifeless poses. Plus, there was blood on the passenger seat, but it wasn't Gambrell's since he had no open wounds. Howard had a hunch they had caught the California Strangler. They took Kraft to the sheriff's department and searched his house, finding clothes and belongings of many young men whose bodies had been found over the years, along with more photos of unconscious or dead men. But the most shocking find was Kraft's coded list of 61 victims, including 4 double murders, totaling 65 young men. Gambrell was not on the list since his death led to Kraft's arrest. After matching the list with discovered bodies, the count reached 67, clearly indicating Kraft needed to face the harshest penalty. The California Strangler was charged with 15 murders between December 1972 and May 1983, after over 700 witnesses were interviewed and more than 250 pieces of evidence were presented. The trial began on September 26, 1988, where Kraft pleaded not guilty but was convicted and sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. Following a moratorium in California, his sentence was changed to life without parole. While his capture brought peace to the region, it left an unresolved question. Did he have an accomplice? Some details of Kraft's crime suggested he might not have acted alone. On one hand, forensic evidence in 2 cases revealed an extra set of fingerprints and DNA that didn't match the California Strangler. On the other, it seemed unlikely that Kraft could have moved bodies weighing up to 200 pounds alone, and it was even more suspicious that he kept them in his car for long periods without anyone noticing. Moreover, the photos Kraft had of the murdered men had to be developed somewhere over the years, yet no photo lab ever reported these images to the police. Initially, it was thought Kraft might have developed them himself, but he lacked a darkroom and the necessary skills. Suspicion fell on Jeff Graves, Kraft's ex-partner, but he died before the police could question him, leaving the mystery unsolved. However, a breakthrough seemed to come years later when Bob Jackson claimed to have the answers. After Dennis McDougal published his book Angel of Darkness about the California Strangler in 1991, Jackson contacted him, confessing to killing 2 hitchhikers with Kraft, one in Wyoming in 1975 and another in Colorado in 1976. However, authorities in both states said they couldn't verify these claims. Jackson insisted he knew more about Kraft, claiming Kraft's list only included the most memorable murders and that the real number of victims was closer to 100. McDougal reported this to the police and provided interview recordings. The detectives questioned Jackson but didn't believe him. No murder charges were filed against him, and he was eventually persuaded to check into a psychiatric hospital. Jackson gained some notoriety when his claims were published in a Beach magazine article in January 2000. Meanwhile, Kraft sued McDougal and the Angel of Darkness publisher, claiming the book tarnished his reputation, portrayed him as sick and insane, and hindered his future job prospects, demanding $62 million in damages. The lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous in June 1994, ending the fabrications of the California Strangler. Kraft is still in prison. Despite most of the bodies being found, 22 remain unlocated. The California Strangler shows no interest in aiding the investigation or expressing remorse for his actions. His sadistic crimes are as shocking as his ability to evade capture for a decade, instilling terror and leaving a bloody stain across California. That's the end of today's episode of Unreal True Crime. We've dived deep into the shadows of humanity's darkest deeds, but remember, the truth is often stranger and more chilling than fiction. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat in our exploration of the most bewildering criminal cases. Until next time, this is Unreal True Crime. Rossana Galliano was having dinner with her sister Monica in the living room of her house in El Remanso, Exaltación de la Cruz, when her phone rang. It was her husband, Jose Arts, calling to say he was running late to pick up their sons, Geronimo and Nehuen, ages 4 and 3. Rossana answered the call, but, struggling to hear, stepped out into the garden to talk. As she tried to communicate with Jose, a figure emerged from the trees, took a few steps toward her, and pulled out a gun. The assailant fired 6 shots, leaving 29-year-old Rossana's body just steps from her home, struck by 4 bullets. Rossana Galliano was born in the late 1970s in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was the youngest child, with 2 brothers named Oscar and Gustavo, and a sister named Monica. Her parents were Reynaldo and Graciela. The details of her childhood and teenage years are a bit of a mystery, but it's known that she finished high school in the late 90s. During this time, Rossana's dad, Reynaldo, worked as a mechanic. Early in 2001, Jose Arts showed up at Reynaldo's workshop. Jose was born on November 22, 1948. He had lived abroad for over 30 years, in places like Greece and the United States, where he even spent 4 years in prison for drug trafficking. Eventually, Jose returned to Argentina in 1996, owning 8 properties in a posh area of Buenos Aires. Jose and Rossana met when he brought his vintage car for repairs at her father's shop. Despite the significant age difference, they started dating quickly. At that time, Rossana was unemployed and quite reserved. Jose appeared to be financially stable, but in reality, his wealth came from his mother, Elsa, who was still in the United States. When Jose, at the age of 52, proposed to 22-year-old Rossana, her mother Graciela questioned if he was too old for her daughter. Jose argued that love knew no age. Looking for assurance, Graciela turned to Rossana, who, in a whisper, confirmed her desire to marry him. The couple got married on November 17, 2001, after just 7 months of dating. Jose claimed that his cheerful, modern, and smart personality won Rossana over. Soon after, they had a son named Geronimo. But not long after, problems began to show. Jose was a controlling and jealous man who often belittled Roxana and her family. This abuse eventually became physical, leaving Roxana feeling trapped and fearful. Jose's intimidating presence, reinforced by owning 2 guns, ensured he kept control, a situation that Roxana's family was painfully aware of. It was common for Jose to show off his guns, either when someone visited their home or when he was out visiting others. One time, while painting their house, Roxana's brother Oscar witnessed Jose physically assaulting her, telling her to shut up before hitting her. On another occasion, her father noticed bruises on Roxana's back, and she simply told him that Jose had dragged her across the pavement. Despite these troubles, Roxana and Jose welcomed their second child, and Roxana tried her best to make the relationship work, hoping to provide a stable home for their children. However, her efforts were constantly undermined by Jose's temper and disrespectful behavior. To make matters worse, Jose's mother, Elsa, controlled the household from afar, making decisions about their lives during her short visits to Argentina. By 2006, Roxana had endured unbearable abuse and finally reported Jose for domestic violence. Her family was largely unaware of the full extent of her suffering. Months later, Roxana filed a second complaint, including a request for a medical examination due to her injuries. Following this, she opened up to her sister Monica, and they made a pact to communicate whenever something happened. Monica became her sanctuary and support. Whenever life with Jose became unbearable, Roxana would visit Monica's apartment with her children, though Jose dictated when they must return, often with death threats. At times, he verbally abused Roxana, criticizing her abilities as a mother. Eventually, she decided to move in with Monica and the children, while Jose stayed at his house. After some time, Roxana filed another complaint and sought a divorce, resulting in a restraining order against Jose. They only met at a neutral property in El Remanso, Exaltación de la Cruz, for child visitation, as arranged by the court. It was there that Roxana shared the extent of her ordeal with the gardener. Daniel Gonzalez, who lived nearby, was married and had a daughter. Rumors suggested a secret romance between Roxana and Daniel, but this was never confirmed. Jose's threats continued, and Roxana even played a voicemail for her brother Oscar in which Jose talked about killing her. In mid-2007, while hanging out with friends at a bar, Roxana met Oscar Lugo. He was 32, lived in Marino, and worked in a sewing workshop. They hit it off immediately, exchanged numbers, and started dating. Oscar Lugo was old-fashioned, a gentleman who was kind, attentive, and listened to her. For 29-year-old Roxana, who had been through endless turmoil, it felt like she was rediscovering a nearly forgotten life. Oscar Lugo noticed Roxana's lack of confidence and the fear in her. By December 2007, he had joined her for the holiday festivities, even dressing up as Santa Claus to delight her sons. But the happiness was marred by Jose, who kept tabs on Roxana's every move. Aware of her new relationship and panicked by the looming divorce, Jose called Roxana, offering her a truck to end things with Oscar Lugo. She refused, and it was her new boyfriend who accompanied her to the hospital during a severe nervous breakdown. Out of options, Jose hatched a plan, financed by his mother, Elsa. They meticulously arranged to hire a hitman whose identity remains a mystery. On January 16, 2008, Roxana and her sister Monica went to El Remanso to pick up her sons, age 4 and 3. The handover was delayed by Jose with excuses. At 9:15 p.m., Jose called, claiming Geronimo had a fever and he would take him to the hospital and return him the next day. However, Rossana insisted on having the children back to care for Geronimo herself. The call was brief, and then she went inside. Around 9:53 p.m., Rossana texted Oscar Lugo with a casual message about their plans for the next day. At 10 p.m., Rossana and Monica sat down for dinner. At 10:50 p.m., Jose called again, and this conversation turned into a deadly trap. Rossana went out to the garden for better reception, where a shadowy figure emerged from behind the trees and shot her 4 times with a .45 caliber gun. Hearing the shots, Monica screamed, saw Rossana stagger and collapse. Frantic, Monica tried calling 911 without success, then asked her boyfriend to alert the police. Meanwhile, Oscar Lugo, unaware of the events, tried contacting Rossana at 11 p.m. and failing that, tried to reach Monica but got no response. Police investigations revealed that the shooter had entered from an adjacent vacant lot. A witness saw someone fleeing through a gap in the fence but couldn't provide a clear description due to the darkness. That night, Jose was questioned and appeared shocked. After requesting a lawyer, he let the lawyer handle the proceedings and left. The next day, during further searches, a red sweater was found, which Rossana's relatives believed belonged to Jose, making him the prime suspect in their eyes. The case grabbed media attention and shocked the country, becoming scandalous as Jose and his mother publicly claimed his innocence and talked bad about Rossana, suggesting she had multiple lovers and those men should be investigated instead. After the incident, Daniel, the gardener, became reclusive, speaking to no one. On the night of Rossana's funeral, Reynaldo noticed Jose nearby in a truck, watching from a distance without joining or expressing condolences. Jose's defense later targeted Monica, Rossana's sister and the sole witness, raising doubts about her by questioning why there were no bloodstains on her clothes and why she ran for her phone instead of helping her sister. However, this theory was unsupported. The investigators argued the weapon was too heavy for a woman to manage. An important point raised by the detectives was that anyone familiar with the house would know Rossana needed to go outside to get a cell signal, indicating significant premeditation in the crime. During the investigation, Rossana's sons were cared for by their father and grandmother Elsa, while their grandmother Graciela could see them. However, Monica and Oscar were denied access, with Jose claiming serious safety concerns for his sons. Despite the legal restrictions, the children expressed a desire to see their Aunt Monica, leading Jose to occasionally allow visits. Monica used these opportunities to take them to a psychologist. Eventually, Graciela obtained visitation rights, though not guardianship. In an interview at the time, Jose alleged that Rossana had 4 lovers, all with legal troubles. According to Jose, Rossana was intimate with these men to uncover their secrets, which she then used to blackmail them for benefits. Meanwhile, after receiving threats, Oscar was made a protected witness in his sister's case, requiring him to wear a tracking bracelet and being assigned police protection. As 2007 was ending, the investigators had yet to find solid evidence to charge any of the suspects. However, a significant turn came a year after the murder when Jose was arrested in January 2008, charged with aggravated homicide due to their relationship, premeditation, and the involvement of 2 or more people. The preliminary hearings began on January 28, 2008. Reynaldo, Graciela, Monica, and Oscar testified about Jose's repeated threats, violent nature, and use of firearms for intimidation. The mother also presented the last text messages from her daughter to the prosecutor. After the hearing, Reynaldo expressed feeling a heavy burden but found relief in fulfilling his duty to his daughter's memory. The next day, Oscar Lugo, Rosana's former boyfriend, testified against Jose, describing him similarly to the family's view. He mentioned Jose's attempts to tarnish his and Rosana's reputations, adding that Rosana believed Jose's claims of her having multiple lovers were a tactic to discredit her in their impending divorce. Jose's lawyer downplayed the allegations of Jose's emotional instability and aggression, suggesting they were echoing Rosana's narrative. On February 7, 2008, a 12-hour investigative session took place, with Jose's mother traveling from the United States for her turn to testify. Meanwhile, a new search at El Remanso yielded no new evidence. By then, Rosana's family suspected her mother-in-law's involvement in the plot. As a result, Reynaldo and Graciela's lawyer considered requesting her arrest. In defense, Jose and his mother's lawyer argued that Jose's mother had stated in her testimony that she bought houses for her grandchildren, believing the divorce settlement would not harm them. It was also added that it was untrue that Jose's mother and Rosana had a bad relationship. The media continued to debate the circumstances of Rosana's death and the notion that Jose orchestrated the murder, hinting at another perpetrator. Despite the suspicions, Jose was released on bail and took care of his children. Later, the court deemed the police protection for Oscar, Rosana's brother who worked as a taxi driver, unnecessary. On the early morning of July 5, 2008, Oscar was attacked by two armed men. They beat and threatened him for an hour before abandoning him in a vacant lot, where he was found thanks to his protective witness tracking bracelet. Though not severely injured, he was deeply shaken. Amidst the grief of losing Rosana and the ongoing custody battle, the family faced renewed fear, a fear that was palpable and justified. With no one convicted and ongoing threats, the demand for justice grew more urgent, yet the judicial system's slow pace was disheartening. Years passed, and by 2012, the trial and custody dispute dragged on. 4 years after the attack, Oscar used his visitation rights to take his nephews to play soccer, sharing a memorable hug with the 6- and 7-year-old boys. In April 2013, the oral trial started. Jose maintained his innocence. In May, proceedings were delayed when Jose suffered a stroke, pushing the final verdict to November 2013. The judges found that the murder was meticulously planned, resembling organized crime. Jose and Elsa were implicated in choosing the time and place for the attack, knowing that a phone call would lure Rosana outside, making her vulnerable. The court found financial motives behind the murder, as Jose did not want to split the marital assets. Jose and Elsa were sentenced to life imprisonment. The conviction was upheld by the higher court, highlighting Jose's threats, the domestic violence endured by Rosana, and the dominant influence of his mother. The actual shooters were never identified. In 2015, Jose and Elsa received house arrest, Jose due to his health and Elsa due to her age, allowing the kids to live with them again. The media continued to cover the children's story for years, during which time Monica and Graciela had no contact with them. The boys shuffled between homes known to their father but strangers to Rosana's family. In the second week of January 2017, the court allowed the children to spend a weekend with their maternal grandparents for the first time. The Galliano family prepared their home with fresh paint, a thorough cleaning, and decorations. They hung balloons and made a colorful welcome sign. Graciela prepared their favorite dish. That weekend, the Galliano home was filled with joy as the boys played soccer, video games, and even asked to sleep in their grandmother's bed, whom they hadn't seen in over 2 years. On November 24, 2018, Jose died after another stroke. The event was another blow for the children, who attended their father's funeral. During the funeral, they expressed their concern about their future with their Aunt Monica. She assured them with calmness and love, promising to support whatever they decided. They chose to live with Monica, who then had to confront Elsa to communicate the boys' decision. Through these and many other instances, it was clear that Monica always acted in alignment with her nephew's wishes, whether they wanted to talk or preferred silence. Monica's primary goal was to provide stability and comfort for the boys. In March 2019, Geronimo chose not to change schools since he was close to his friends and had 2 years left there, so he went back to live with his grandmother Elsa. Meanwhile, Monica sought custody of the other kid. Things seemed to be stabilizing, but in the last week of November 2019, 87-year-old Elsa was moved from her home to the hospital, where she passed away on November 30th. The following month, Monica was granted custody of Nahuen. By year's end, Geronimo moved in with a friend of his grandmother. Both brothers continued to need psychological support to process their experiences, with Geronimo struggling with depression. Their psychologist noted the overwhelming succession of events they faced. In March 2020, just before pandemic restrictions started, the person Geronimo was living with passed away, leading him to seek refuge with his Aunt Monica until October 2020. Upon turning 18, Geronimo rented a small apartment and lived independently, supported by income from his inherited properties. Monica began legal proceedings to secure their inheritance, fearing they might be deprived of their assets. Nahuen, meanwhile, showed emotional stability thanks to the support he received, and was encouraged to return to therapy whenever needed. And so, dear viewers, this concludes today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you appreciate my work. Good night and see you in the next crime story. In Kern County, there are many murders each year, but the murder of Yvette Pena in a Bakersfield motel caught the public's eye and became especially infamous. This tragic event occurred in 2011 and was shocking in its brutality. What made this case even more remarkable was the individual who confessed to the crime, a merciless man covered in tattoos. His chilling demeanor and the gruesome details of the murder captivated and horrified the community. Born on March 7, 1988, in Bakersfield, California, Jaime Osuna's early life unfolded in a tumultuous manner. His mother, Michelle, was just 19 years old at the time, while little is known about his father except that he was 21, rebellious, and undisciplined. Jaime's father displayed abusive tendencies toward Michelle from the start, even resorting to kicking her in the stomach while she was pregnant with Jaime. This cruel act left lasting harm on Jaime, even before he took his first breath. Some speculate that this incident may have contributed to Jaime's ear malformation and potentially impacted his brain development. Recognizing the abusive nature of her husband, Michelle made the courageous decision to divorce him. Soon afterward, she met Jeff, a man with whom she felt an instant connection, and it appeared that Jeff would step into the role of Jaime's new stepfather. Jaime's biological father, however, strongly opposed this development. Despite Michelle's desire to sever ties with him, he persisted in causing trouble. One fateful night, He threatened Jeff by holding a knife to his throat. Thankfully, the situation didn't escalate further. He was apprehended and a restraining order was issued. This marks the last mention of Jamie's biological father in his story. Shortly thereafter, Michelle married Jeff, and they began cohabiting with Jamie and his brother, who was 2 years Jamie's senior. This is where the story takes a dark and troubling turn. While Jeff desired Michelle, he seemed less enthusiastic about assuming the role of a stepfather. Regrettably, this resulted in a period of misery for Jaime, while his older brother was somewhat spared, having gone to live with their grandparents once they became aware of Jeff's abusive behavior. It remains unclear why Jamie wasn't also taken in by his grandparents, but it seems that they declined to care for him, leaving one to wonder why they would reject a 3-year-old child. It's important to note that Michelle also made the choice to prioritize her relationship with Jeff over the well-being of her 2 young sons. Jeff's abusive actions were well documented through accounts from Michelle, Jaime, and records from hospitals and law enforcement agencies. On one occasion, during a road trip with Michelle and Jaime secured in a baby carrier in the back seat, Jaime's crying provoked Jeff to a point where he began shouting at the child. Shockingly, he then threw the baby carrier out of the moving car. Fortunately, the baby carrier landed safely, and Jamie displayed no visible injuries. However, subsequent examinations revealed severe brain damage that could have resulted from this traumatic incident. Around the age of 5, another distressing incident marred Jamie's already tumultuous childhood. He accidentally spilled some juice on the floor, which infuriated Jeff. In a fit of anger, Jeff grabbed a belt and began to mercilessly beat the young boy. This time, Michelle intervened by calling the police. Jeff was subsequently arrested on charges of child cruelty due to the visible marks on Jamie's body. However, the charges were relatively lenient and, disconcertingly, Jeff returned home just 10 days later, with Michelle still standing by his side. Even after they had their own children, Jeff continued to mistreat Jamie, depriving him of proper meals and sometimes serving his food on the floor. Jaime increasingly felt like an outsider in his own home. Michelle, though aware of her past mistakes, found herself unable to rectify the deep-seated damage that had been done. At the age of 12, Jaime finally managed to escape the clutches of his abusive household and went to live with his grandparents. Everyone had come to realize that Jeff's mistreatment of Jamie would not cease. It was during this time that they began to notice the emotional numbness that had gripped Jaime from a tender age. Michelle described it as if his soul had been torn away, leaving him apathetic towards everything and everyone around him. This period marked the onset of Jaime's disturbing behavior. He began cooking animals in a nearby forest, and in the absence of anyone at home, subjected his own pet cat to chilling ordeals, locking it in the refrigerator and even the oven. He also turned to self-harm, as it seemed to be the only way for him to feel something, anything, in a world where he felt utterly numb. At the age of 15, Jaime took a dire turn when he brutally stabbed another boy, leaving him gravely wounded but fortunate to survive the ordeal. This criminal act led to Jaime's incarceration in a juvenile correctional facility, where he would spend the next 4 years. It was during this period that Michelle finally confronted the gravity of her irresponsibility toward Jaime, resulting in her decision to divorce Jeff. A few years later, Jeff met his demise due to a heart attack. Given his abusive history, it's conceivable that Jaime might have inflicted harm upon him if he had not passed away. On September 14, 2007, Jaime was released from prison at the age of 19. By this time, he had acquired a notorious reputation as a troublemaker, deeply entrenched in gang activities. He showed little interest in education or gainful employment, instead opting for a lifestyle characterized by revelry and association with his gang affiliates. The turning point in this harrowing narrative occurred in December 2008 when a 16-year-old boy's birthday party took a rather unexpected turn. This was no typical birthday celebration adorned with Mickey Mouse piñatas and cheerful decorations. Instead, it drew a crowd from the gritty underbelly of society, and the absence of any responsible adult to maintain order was notable. This unconventional gathering had been organized by the birthday boy's mother, who was known for her laissez-faire attitude. Joelle Castellano, a 37-year-old single mother of three, played a central role in this intriguing tale. She decided to host a party for underage youths, which, while undoubtedly irresponsible, didn't spell the end of the world. As the evening progressed, however, things took a turn for the chaotic, with Joelle's dance with a young man catching the eye of her nephew. It seemed that this young relative became envious, possibly due to his own romantic feelings for his aunt, leading him to want to keep others away from her. In his quest to intimidate the young man, Joelle pointed to Jaime, who, despite not yet having the distinctive facial tattoos he would later acquire, stood at around 5'3". However, it was Jaime's demeanor and attitude that made him an intimidating presence, perhaps more so than anyone else in the room. Jaime agreed to confront the young man, proceeding to the kitchen, where he retrieved a knife and warned the boy to steer clear of Joelle. The young man, believing that Jaime wouldn't actually follow through, issued a challenge. However, Jaime defied expectations and indeed stabbed the young man, leading to his return to prison. But something had changed this time. Jaime couldn't shake one thought from his mind. He had fallen head over heels in love with Joelle. It wasn't just because of the recent stabbing incident, but a genuine and profound love. As they say, love can compel us to commit acts beyond imagination. Jaime no longer cared about his circumstances. He believed he could win over Joelle, despite their age gap, his imprisonment, and their initial encounter involving a stabbing. Jaime began sending heartfelt love letters to Joelle, and eventually, she too succumbed to his affections. Thus, they embarked on a long-distance relationship. 11 months later, when Jaime completed his sentence, Joelle picked him up in her truck. However, her confidence wavered upon seeing that Jaime had acquired facial tattoos, raising doubts about the seriousness of their relationship. Despite all the waiting, Jaime's eagerness prevailed as he suggested to Joelle that they spend the night in a motel. Joelle agreed, albeit under the impression that it would be a one-night affair. Yet Jaime, known as the sharpshooter, proved remarkably effective, as that single night led to Joelle becoming pregnant. With this development, she felt increasingly inclined to establish a lasting relationship with him. A mere 3 months later, they sealed their commitment in marriage. Jaime made solemn promises to Joelle, assuring her that he understood the hardships of growing up in a fractured family and vowing to be a devoted father and husband. However, even before their child came into the picture, he exhibited abusive behavior towards Joelle. It's at this point in the story that he began to adopt characteristics reminiscent of the Joker, not to sensationalize the narrative, but because there is a noticeable parallel. His abuse towards Joelle wasn't solely physical. It had a strong psychological element, perhaps driven by the belief that this form of harm could be even more devastating. An example of this occurred during one heated argument when things spiraled out of control. Jaime seized the ashes of Joelle's deceased mother from a vase and fled with them. He was keenly aware that Joelle had not yet come to terms with her mother's passing, and this act prompted her to call the police. Jaime was arrested, but the ashes were never recovered. This unfortunate incident resulted in Jaime being sent back to prison, causing him to miss the birth of his child. Upon his release, Joelle granted him another chance, hoping that, with the child's arrival, Jaime would take on the role of a responsible father. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a futile endeavor. Shortly thereafter, Jaime shifted his focus from physical harm to inflicting emotional distress on Joelle. She did something that greatly disturbed individuals like him who craved attention. She ignored him completely. Regardless of what he said or did, it no longer affected her. One day, in an attempt to provoke a reaction from Joelle, Jaime pushed her 7-year-old son off the bed, all while keeping his gaze fixed on her. His tactics proved successful. She became visibly upset and fetched a knife from the kitchen. In a stern tone, she warned him, "Mess with me, but never with my kids." At that moment, Jaime's face betrayed his surprise and fear. He hadn't anticipated such a response. Frightened, he reached out to his gang to extricate him from the situation. While outside the house, Jaime turned to methamphetamines, which explains his current aged appearance, making him resemble a 60-year-old man. Now that he no longer officially resided with Joelle, he commenced stalking her from outside her home. Joelle called the police, leading to Jaime's arrest and a 7-month prison sentence for violating his parole. However, within a week of his release, he resumed his harassment of Joelle. She would spot him outside her window, his gaze unwavering, and he would make menacing phone calls, threatening her and her children. Joelle contacted the police once again, but upon their arrival they failed to locate Jaime. Days passed with no trace of him. Then, on November 8, 2011, Joelle received a chilling call from Jaime, in which he uttered the sinister words, "Check the news. I just killed a woman at the Morocco Motel." Naturally, Joel's immediate response was to contact the police. However, they didn't take her seriously. What transpired next is where the story takes an eerie turn, as it was 5 days after this call that a motel employee discovered a gruesome crime scene in one of the motel's rooms. The victim was a 37-year-old woman named Yvette, a mother of 6. Details are scarce, but it appears to have been an exceedingly horrific crime scene. Investigators, who deemed it one of the most disturbing cases in their careers, found evidence of 2 knives and scissors used in the slow and torturous manner of death. Jaime, it seemed, harbored a sadistic streak. You might wonder how I have access to these gruesome details. Well, this wouldn't be his solitary murder, nor the most heinous. Even more chilling is the absence of any apparent motive for targeting this woman, strongly suggesting that she became a victim solely because of her resemblance to Joelle. Jaime would ultimately face arrest, trial, and sentencing for this horrifying murder. While incarcerated, Jaime took disturbing actions to further torment Joelle. He would occasionally contact Child Protective Services in an attempt to have her custody of her children revoked, knowing that this would inflict the most pain on her. He even went to the extent of trying to hire a hitman to eliminate her. However, because he communicated these intentions through letters, the police intercepted them before they could reach their intended recipient. These actions only added layers to the mask he wore, a facade he maintained to feel something, a desperate attempt to fill the void he had experienced as a child. The trial for the murder of Yvette dragged on for 5 years, during which Jaime displayed no remorse whenever he appeared in court. He would even wave and laugh at the victim's family. This extended trial was a result of Jaime's refusal to confess. It's worth noting that he managed to prolong the trial for more than half a decade by remaining silent. However, on March 24, 2017, just 3 days before the final trial, where the verdict was still uncertain, a news channel offered him an interview. They aimed to capitalize on his striking appearance to generate clicks and had planned to ask him challenging questions to elicit a confession. To everyone's astonishment, they didn't need to ask any questions because Jaime confessed to the murder of Yvette right at the start of the interview. It's evident that he did this to gain notoriety, as there is no doubt that he deliberately presented himself as a villain in the news. What corroborates this is his confession to 2 more murders, one at the age of 13 and the other at 19. The police initiated a search for the supposed victims based on Jamie's descriptions, since he hadn't provided any names. Given that he had spent his entire life in Bakersfield, the margin for error was minimal. However, the database did not yield any records of missing persons or unsolved murders that could be attributed to him. Therefore, it's highly likely that these claims are exaggerated. With all these confessions, Jaime was undoubtedly found guilty 3 days later. However, he did not receive the death penalty because of his confession on the day of the trial, which had caused a 5-year delay and wasted time and resources. Still, what remains perplexing to everyone is what happened next. Upon entering prison, he exhibited increasingly erratic behavior. He painted the walls of his cell with his own blood. On one fateful evening, he was placed in a cell with a man he harbored animosity towards, and he mercilessly stabbed him multiple times using a knife. He even inflicted a deep facial wound, requiring the victim to undergo 67 stitches. Jaime went so far as to request photographs of his victims as trophies, further underscoring the disturbing nature of his actions. He had earned a reputation as an inmate too dangerous to share a cell with anyone, but in a bewildering and illogical turn of events in March 2019, Jaime found himself with his first-ever cellmate, a 44-year-old man named Luis Romero. In 1992, at the tender age of 17, Luis, originally from Guatemala, had joined a gang in the United States and had taken someone's life during a confrontation with rival gang members. He had been sentenced to 27 years in prison and was on the verge of completing his sentence. However, in a confounding and irrational twist of fate, he was assigned to the same cell as Jaime, who had committed a more gruesome crime. Jaime was well aware of the extent of his own actions, having just committed them, boasting a lengthy history of criminal deeds. Moreover, he had been denied cellmates in the past because of the perceived danger he posed. Luis was merely 3 weeks away from regaining his freedom. In less than 24 hours since they had become cellmates, on the morning of March 9, 2019, when correctional officers came to inspect their cell, they stumbled upon an eerie sight. Jaime was smiling, wearing a collar. This collar was fashioned from various parts of Luis's body, and Jaime had gone as far as carving a grotesque, clown-like smile on Luis's face. He had toyed with his lifeless body, inscribed messages on the walls using blood, and declared, "I am the man of 1,000 faces." Now, the theories start to surface because it is evident that such an atrocity would require more than a mere hour. It would take many hours to commit such unspeakable acts. A correctional officer responsible for conducting a nighttime check reported that everything was in order, even though Luis's body indicated that the gruesome assault had already begun at that hour. Some guards attempted to justify this oversight by claiming that Jaime had placed a blanket to conceal the ongoing horror. But if an inmate places a blanket to obscure events behind a cell door, it is incumbent upon the guard to enter and investigate. What transpired here was not an isolated incident at this prison. It occurred at a prison which had gained notoriety due to allegations of guards organizing fights among inmates, all while placing bets on the outcomes. There exist videos of these fights, complete with a presenter and commentator. Furthermore, suspicions linger that this practice was employed when authorities sought to dispose of a troublesome inmate. They would orchestrate a fight, and when one participant was winning, they would shoot the other inmate, claiming they were intervening to save them. This case presents further complexity due to Jaime's clearly deteriorated mental state. It is evident that he harbors a fascination with the Joker, as evidenced by the blood-written phrases from the comics adorning his cell. It remains a mystery how he managed to procure razors to make knives, and his letter to a prosecutor inspired by the Joker and featuring the iconic "Why so serious" phrase raises questions. The letter also contained satanic messages, although it's doubtful he genuinely adheres to Satanism. These actions are likely undertaken for attention-seeking purposes. He received a diagnosis of an unknown form of schizophrenia within the spectrum, alongside antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, characterized by erratic behavior, which could explain his propensity to stab others without a clear provocation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result, authorities declared him unfit to stand trial. Consequently, at the age of 33, it appears improbable that Jaime will face the death penalty, and he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jaime was undeniably unhinged, with a touch of clownishness. However, some might argue that he endured a troubled childhood. Nevertheless, the extremity of his actions remains unparalleled. Interestingly, his older brother, who sought refuge with their grandparents at a young age, has since transformed into a prosperous individual, a millionaire who enjoys driving sports cars and has a loving family. You've just witnessed another unreal true crime. Lock in your support by subscribing and turning on notifications. Your insight could open the next story. Have a good day.